name is Dr. Nancy Rosencone, and I'm the Executive Director of the National Council on Alcoholism and Drug Dependence. And I just want to thank everybody that's here from the community and our speakers. As you know, this is a very tough topic to talk about, but I do want to give kudos to Carroll County. I became familiar with Carroll County when Tim was here. Tim Weber has a recovery program that my stepson was a part of. And that was many years ago. But since then, even when you drive through the community, you see all the awareness signs, you see the Good Samaritan signs, you see the sign from the movie, Heroin Still Kills. So I'm very comfortable in Howard County, and I think you should give each one of you a round of applause for being part of this community, having meetings like this, talking to others, and sharing hopefully some solutions to this situation. You probably know if people are here from the health department, and there's many people here that are in recovery themselves, you know that the statistics are very staggering. And this is throughout the country. And we just have to do things differently. We can't just do the same old, and we can't say there isn't enough funding. There is some funding sources, we do have to get to it, but we're all part of the solution. And that's the way we want to look at it. And earlier we were talking and somebody said, oh, I hope there's 100 people. I said, it doesn't matter. If there's 25 people and we can help one or two families out of the 25, help you to understand the disease, help you with your son or daughter or siblings or parents, then that makes a huge difference. We're just here to change the landscape and change the messaging. So it's my privilege to introduce our speakers. We have Sam Bierman, right there. We have Heather, okay? Joanna, most of you know, and Dr. Greg Hopelman. So I have put together, or Joanna has put together, I guess I'm going back to this. Okay, better? Okay. So we have put together some questions, and so we're going to ask, the way we're going to do it is we're going to have the panel first from 7 to 8, let's say, and then if you'll hold your questions from 8 to 8:30, that would work out great. So, stay on top of this and don't forget your questions. Okay, so this is for each participant. If I were a community member, which I don't live in Carroll County, but I am still a community member of my community, I would want to know what each person brings to the table. So I'm going to ask each participant, why are you at this table and how do you support a person in recovery? We'll start with you.
All right. Hi, I'm Heather Asbury. I'm a certified peer recovery specialist. I think the mic.
Oh. I think so.
Is that what you were motioning for? All right.
Yeah,
Is this better?
Yeah.
Okay. So I am a certified peer recovery specialist with the Carroll County Health Department. Why it's important that I'm at the table is because of my position. I am also a person in long-term recovery. A peer support specialist is somebody who is has lived experience of active addiction, who can help others who may be caught up in active addiction and who are seeking recovery. So I think it's important that I'm at this table because I have something that the therapists and the counselors and a lot of other professionals don't have, and I have that lived experience. I was on the streets. I have been in those positions where I've lied, cheated, and stolen. A lot of acts that people that are in active addiction are judged for. And I think it's important that they feel comfortable talking to somebody that has the experience firsthand rather than reading it from a book. And that's also what I have to offer. And I think throughout the questions, we'll go deeper into that.
And also I want to add for Heather and any peer recovery specialist who has this experience, the grassroots experience, the lived experience, without the judgment. So that's important because they've been there, they've done it, and they're not judging others that come and see them and be with them. And that's very important because we all know about stigma and judgment. So you want to add that as well. That's important.
My name is Sam Bierman. I'm the Executive Director of Maryland Addiction Recovery Center, which is which is a long-term treatment program in Towson, Maryland. I'm also a person in long-term recovery. I've been sober since January of 2007. And I guess I'm at this table due to my personal and professional experience. I kind of eat, breathe, and live recovery on a personal and professional level. And I guess my specialties, my clinical specialties include reconstructing family dynamics to help loved ones get sober, and co-occurring mental health disorders as they play in the role of somebody trying to gain access to recovery.
I also want to add for Sam's program that if the individual is not right for whatever reason for his program, he's one of the few providers that will work their butt off to find another placement for that person. Isn't that correct? And Sam and Zach have done a beautiful job. I will refer families, and if it's not a fit, they will determine that it's not a fit, but they don't leave somebody hanging. So they will find another placement. And I think that's fabulous, because in many programs it's like, okay, you don't fit, you can't afford it, whatever, I'm sorry. And they never turn anybody away. They help everybody. So I have to thank you for that. I appreciate that.
I'm Greg Hobelman. I'm here. I'm the medical director up at Ashley Addiction Treatment, and like these two, I'm in long-term recovery as well. So I started off as an anesthesiologist and pain physician, and I did that for a few years. Developed an addiction, and then went to a couple of treatment programs before getting sober. And during that time, I wanted to figure out what to do with my life and which direction did I want to go. And it was very clear when I got out that, I wanted to be a part of the world of recovery. We talk about treatment, but treatment is one piece that helps people get into good long-term recovery. And I think we're going to talk a lot more about that tonight. So I went back and did a psychiatry residency, and then came to Ashley in 2016. And to note, it's the importance of treating. We talk about dual diagnosis and coexisting disorders and so forth, but it's really all wrapped into one. Everybody who is struggling with a substance use disorder has other things going on across the board. So we talk about treatment. We shouldn't be dividing it up or anything like that. We should be looking at it from this truly holistic approach with an idea of getting people into good recovery. So I'm sure we're going to hit more on that tonight, but that's what brings me to the table.
And for Greg, we just met this evening, but Ashley has a fabulous reputation. I'm sure most people, it used to be Father Martin's Ashley. The name has changed, but one of the best parts about Ashley is they do treat the individual as a whole person. So they do the integration with somatic care, as well as substance use disorder, mental health issues, suicide prevention issues. So, and Ashley has really helped out with, there have been several programs, recovery programs that really couldn't survive financially. I'm speaking of a killer recovery in DC, that they've been able to take over, which fits the model. So that's gonna work out really well. So thank you for your work. Last but not least, Joanna. Everybody knows her.
Maybe. So my name is Joanna Dolan. I am the founder of Dolan Research, and we have created a program called Axiom Sober Coaches. And what we do is training on community organizing, which is how I know many of you. And also, I have been a professional life coach for the last 20 years. 7 years ago, I made the choice to leave my lucrative financial planning business and do this instead, because I recognize that as a person in long-term recovery, that I have the benefit of positive psychology and life coaching, which is designed to help people to transform their lives. So as a recovery coach, what I can do is help people in treatment to remember that hope is real, and that recovery is possible for everyone. In the longer term treatments, we do a lot of work with helping people to create life goals, helping them to see a holistic view for their lives. And for people that have long-term recovery, we help them to navigate the life stages and the life changes that sometimes make people go out and use again that many of us are not equipped to handle. So things like losing a loved one, either to death or divorce, or starting a business, or ending a business, or getting married, or getting healthy. We take a really holistic, long-term approach to helping people to transform their lives and enter second stage or third stage recovery.
Now, Joanna and I have worked together on several projects for about a year, and we just met each other tonight. So we've always done it through email, voicemail, text, whatever, and this is the first time we've met each other. So you can, the paths that you cross, it doesn't have to be face-to-face necessarily, so it's a real honor to meet you and to work with you. My next set of questions are not set, but my next two questions are for you, Sam. And I think it's important to talk about these. I think your program seems to focus on childhood issues and trauma. And can you just explain to the community why that is so important?
So like Greg said, recovery is really dependent on someone getting help for their whole life in a holistic approach, in a whole health life approach. And so what we find now is about 95% of everybody that walks through my door has a significant traumatic experience from childhood. And so what we find is that those traumatic experiences, while not causing an addiction or causing a substance use disorder, definitely exacerbate it, right? And so if we are not able to treat and help and treat the symptoms of those underlying trauma issues, of those underlying disorders, then it just creates significant barriers for somebody to get into recovery. One of the main reasons people like me use so much is to dull out pain. And so when you take the drugs away from somebody like me, and you are taking away my solution to the internal pain and the internal turmoil that I go through on a daily basis. And therefore I become extremely, extremely uncomfortable sober. And therefore I'm gonna look for something else to grab onto that's gonna relieve me from that pain inside. And if I don't do something about that pain inside, eventually I'm just gonna start searching for the drugs again. And so that internal pain that I go through, has to be addressed at some point.
Thank you. This next question is for Greg. And you mentioned it, as a member of the community, I think it's important to talk about medication-assisted, and I always call it therapy versus medication-assisted treatment. So, and I've also called it medication-assisted recovery. So, I think that's important, but can you explain that role in helping a person with substance use disorder?
Yeah, first of all, I love that you said that.
Oh.
We actually use the term medication-supported recovery, and that's what we have termed it at Ashley, the term we use. So medication-assisted treatment is what MAT stands for. There's a lot in this question, so I'm going to try to limit it, but a couple of key points. Medication-assisted treatment refers to any medication that helps to assist people through their treatment of a substance use disorder. There are only a few medications that are actually FDA approved, and they're only for alcohol and for opiate use. Now, when people talk about MAT or MAT, a lot of times the mind goes right towards what we call agonist therapy or methadone or buprenorphine, and that is a segment of medication-assisted treatment, but it's not the full medications that encompass medication-assisted treatment. We do use the term medication-supported recovery. Addiction or substance use disorder is a chronically progressive and fatal disease. And we know that, and that's how we see this. Being such, we should treat this like a disease. So calling something assisted treatment, medication-assisted treatment, is not medication-assisted treatment, it's just treatment, period. We don't have to bring in medication-assisted. So the terminology doesn't work very well, doesn't sit well with us. And the idea is we're trying to get people into good recovery. And recovery isn't necessarily abstinence from all minor mood-altering medications. There are a lot of measures of good recovery, which are your relationships improving? Are you functioning well in life? Are you employed? Or are you in a good identity, whatever that might be, whatever your role is in life? So we measure recovery in a different way. And however we get there, there are many, many ways to get there, is perfectly fine. And so supporting that with medications is one way to do it. Just to finish off, there's a split between those who believe in medication-assisted treatment and those who believe in abstinence-based treatment. And it's very unfortunate that there's the divide. We don't want that divide. We're all on the same team. We're looking to get people better. And so in reality, it's a continuum. And when we talk about harm reduction, everything we do to get somebody into a program of recovery or into a place of good recovery is harm reduction. So there's a lot in there. We can break it down more if you want, but that's kind of the overview, the very brief few words on MAT.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Joanna, we'll go to you next. And I know with NCABD, we always say we support multiple paths to recovery. Just like we're all individuals, we're all going to take our time. The people we work with, everybody does it differently, and you can't say there's one size fits all. I mean, we have to really look at people as individuals, so everybody has a different style and a different response. And I wanted to talk to you, Joanna, or talk to the community about the multiple paths to recovery. Why is it important for people to know that there are options in recovery?
So I think, first off, the multiple pathways to recovery are the many different ways that we heal. And they range from natural recovery. My father is in recovery. He was an alcoholic. I remember him drinking until I was in second grade. And he just quit. Like one day the consequences got too hard and he quit. He started going to church and he got better. Never walked a day into a 12-step organization, and doesn't understand really like that people need other ways of quitting. He was like, well, why can't you just quit? I did. So natural recovery is one way. And I say it like that because each one of us, each different recovery pathway, many people are like, well, why does it have to be your way? That's why it's important, is because there's the reasons that we heal and the things that get to us are different from each different person. So if we can see that all these pathways really work, it gives us all the chance to heal. So there's natural, like my father. There's 12-step recovery, which are what we commonly hear about, AA, NA, CA, HA. And the 12-step programs are phenomenal, and they really work well if it's attraction, not promotion. But when we start legislating that people have to go for punishment reasons, or they have to go because a doctor's forcing them, or a halfway house is forcing them, we're causing damage because we're forcing someone's hand. That's not how recovery works. Or at least that's not how 12-step works, right? 12-step's about attraction, not promotion. We can share with people that that's a positive way to go, but that's how we end up with splinters. Other ways of doing it are secular recovery, so places that are not faith-based. So Life Ring would be a good one. Smart Recovery is a great one. I heard that one over there. And then we have other organizations that are faith-based. So Celebrate Recovery is a great one. They are a Christian-based organization that's 12-step oriented. Refuge Recovery is a Buddhist tradition that is 12-step oriented. We have medication-supported recovery. We have the peer-supported assistance. And then we have counseling. A lot of people get better through counseling, ongoing work with counselors, addictionologists, and and doctors all the way along the ways. And then you have recovery support. I'm a recovery support. So if you've exhausted all of the recovery stuff that's available and you've got some long-term sustained recovery, I'm a good option if you're like starting to make decisions. So recovery coaching is a good supportive. Also, there is recovery art programs. Maryland is well known for programs that are innovative, cutting edge. Recovery high schools, recovery college programs, all of these different programs are designed to help people to get to long-term recovery, because we know that if you can keep someone engaged in recovery for long-term, that their chances of healing are so much greater than if they just go to a detox and then join a fellowship, or if they just go to a 28-day program. If we can keep people engaged and we can keep people moving forward, not just at day one, but at 20, 30 years sober, then we can help people to be productive members of society, and that's what the multiple pathways to recovery are about.
Thank you. This one is for Heather. Heather, can you tell us what they call person-centered language, and why does it matter to use it that way?
Sure. Person-centered language is identifying an individual by their assets and by their strengths, not by their illness or their disease. A lot of times we hear the words bipolar or even worse, crazy, or other terms thrown around about people who have substance use disorder or mental health disorders. And that's just not okay. A lot of individuals stay using drugs and alcohol, and some individuals stay very sick with mental health because of the stigma and the stereotype that surrounds those illnesses and those disorders. And by using their name or their strength-based roles, like, today I'm a mother, I am a friend, I am a daughter, I am a coworker. I'm not just defined by my disease and by my illnesses. And why we use person-centered language is it helps an individual, build strengths in themselves and build courage and confidence within themselves. They don't have to be identified by, what their disease is. And a lot of times we push people away when that happens. The best thing that I can do, in my office is that I refer to an individual by their name. That's their identity, is their name. It's not, my client, it's not my consumer, it's James or whatever their name may be. When I'm referring to them, in a setting where their name is confidential, I do ask the individual what they prefer to be referred to as. Would you prefer to be a client, a patient, a recovery, a peer? My position is a peer recovery specialist, but the individuals I work with are my peers as well. So I use their name. It's really important to help them identify who they are. When I was first diagnosed with my mental health conditions, it scared me. It made me, even somatic health, it made me feel like that was my identity. And I forgot all about the other things that make me who I am today, and who make me Heather. So it's really important that we make sure that we talk to people like they're people, not a number, not a piece of paper, or not just another bill.
Thank you, Heather. This one is for Sam. What is your model for recovery, and why is it important? Because your program is unique, so can you explain that for? I mean, I know it, but can you explain
I'll
it
do
for
my
others?
best in the short time that I have.
Okay.
Our model focuses on a couple things. One, Joanna touched on it really well, is engagement with our patients. And so what we believe is that the quicker that we engage with our patients, the quicker that we gain their trust and they gain our trust, the more the likelihood we could guide them and nudge them in the right direction. And so what we call it developing a therapeutic alliance. And so our staff are extremely skilled in developing these, what we call therapeutic alliances, with our clients really, really quickly, so that we can change their perception around and guide them towards recovery. But I think our biggest thing is that we look at the disease of addiction as kind of this 10-spoke wheel. And we have to address every single one of those 10 spokes before we feel that somebody's going to be in good recovery, as Greg described. And so that 10-spoke wheel has many different aspects of it. One of them is employment. One of them is education. One of them is underlying or co-occurring mental health conditions. One of them is family support system. One of them is their living environment, right? And so all of these things, so we feel it's our job to look at all of those factors of somebody's life, just like a biopsychosocial model of health, of looking at their biomedical conditions, their physiological conditions, as well as their social conditions, and addressing all of that and believing that if you are able to address all of that, their chances of getting better increase exponentially. And so that's like a very surface level explanation of it. Obviously it goes, a lot deeper into that. One of the big things that we really pride ourselves on at MARC is we're really big believers in the treatment of families as well as our patients. And our basic motto behind that is the family is the patient and the patient is the family. And we believe that families can either be really big barriers to recovery or really big assets to their loved one's recovery. And with our help and guidance, we turn the family system into those big assets. And that is done through a lot of education, a lot of support, peer support as well. We have a free peer support family group that meets at our center every Wednesday night. And through a number of other different avenues for families as well, and really gets them involved in the treatment process.
I mean, that's so perfect that you said that, because it is, I'm a family member, and it is a family disease. So, and some other diseases are not so involved with the families, but this one's really important. So in many cases, like Sam said, the family has to change possibly their understanding and their messaging, because we have, as family members, sometimes we have a tendency to be punitive, whereas you have to take a step back and say that this is a chronic brain disease, and let's work around it from a positive angle versus a negative angle.
Can I add to that, Nancy, real
yes,
quick?
Please.
So one thing I did wanted to add, and I always thought it was good this way, when I was 12, my mother was diagnosed with cancer. And when she was diagnosed with cancer, the reaction of my family and my family friends and the people that supported my family was completely different than when I was 21 years old and I was diagnosed with a substance use disorder. When my mother was diagnosed with cancer, my entire family system, that includes my family, friends, my extended family, everybody completely rallied around my family. They rallied around my mother, her kids. They brought us dinner every night. They made sure we got to the hospital when we needed to go to the hospital. They made sure my dad was able to go to work every day and that we were taken care of. They created a fellowship of a support system around us to get my family through this, and it made all the difference in the world. The outcome wasn't different, but it made a huge difference for our family and for my mother, right? When I was diagnosed, as a heroin addict, when I was 21 years old, everybody repelled, completely repelled. There was no support for my father, who was a single father at that time, no support for my little sister, who was 17 years old at the time. There was barely any support for me, and everybody kind of repelled against me, and it became this very shameful diagnosis, right? And so it created, because of the way everybody else around me reacted and around my father reacted, it created large barriers for me to enter recovery, right? But what it did for my mother, when everybody rallied around her, it made going through cancer treatment that much easier for her. And that's the big difference, and that's why we do what we do.
And we should point out, and I've always struggled with this, I'm sure you've heard the terminology behavioral health. And I met with people in Washington at SAMHSA and people at the FDA, and I said, you're trying on one hand to say this is a chronic brain disease, and then you're calling it behavioral health. So people still have the misconception, like you're talking about, that it's a behavioral issue, that somebody can just start and stop and start and stop. It really is not. It's a chronic brain disease, and I think it's misnomer to call it behavioral health because people think, okay, that's why family members get so mad. Like, I don't understand this. Why can't you just quit? Why can't you just stop? I mean, back to the Nancy Reagan days, just say no. Well, that doesn't even work. I mean, that was a good billboard, no question about it. But I'm just saying that family attitude, just like Sam described, is extremely different. And, you know, I'm in a step-family situation, so I've also been able to help my husband to understand my stepson's situation better. But, you know, there's all these intervention programs for families, but yet you don't always get the family members. You might get the mom, you might not get the dad. You may get a grandparent, but you may not get the grandpa. And we just want people to rally together. You know, when they say, when Hillary Clinton says it takes a village to raise a child. Well, this is true. It takes a whole community to help support it. And some very small ways and very minimal ways. It doesn't have to be a grand gesture. There are many ways to help people and to change their lives. So I appreciate that. Now this next question is for you, Greg, that, and I never understood this, maybe even given the history of this, maybe this is just an insurance issue, to be honest with you. What is the magical number about a 28-day treatment program? I mean, I don't understand that. And someone's going to get better in 28 days, and I guess I need a better understanding what you can do for someone in 28 days, and why is that a magical number?
It's not a magical number at all, and it's based on no evidence. So
Good.
this came about, you know, I mean, the Hazelton model that came about, you know, at a time when we're trying to treat people and figure out how to do it. And remember that treatment of substance use disorders, you know, or addiction as it was, you know, is the redheaded stepchild of medicine, to say the least. It has been ignored in large part for years and years and years, partly because of the behavioral component to it and so forth. But we don't know that much about it. And so the development of treatment for it wasn't like a development of treatment for other diseases, like for diabetes and cancers and so forth. It occurred in a different way. Now, when they were trying to figure it out, they did realize that, hey, providing support, I mean, none of the stuff we're talking about is new. This stuff has actually been around for a long time. None of this is original. It's putting it together in a way that works and figuring out how to move forward. But we do understand that treatment does work. Getting people into a good environment, you know, obviously removing the substances and treating them holistically has value. So, you know, what are they going to get paid for? How are you going to do it? Well, the insurance company said at the time, we'll give you 28 days. So they created a model around 28 days. Now, if you look at it, I mean, prior to that, people were treated for 6 months. Again, the modalities of treatment were so varied, we don't have good evidence as to what works and what doesn't. So no one really had a good way to prove what the time is. And now, you know, if you send a physician to recovery, they're going to be sent for 90 days or longer, right? Because engagement in treatment is what works. Engagement in recovery is what works. So 28 days, there's no magic number at all. And what we really have to do is look at people individually and seeing what they need. So somebody may need a period of 2 weeks of stabilization, and then they can move on to the next level of care, whether that's partial hospitalization or IOP, whatever it might be. Some people may need many months, and it would be better to have a variable length of stay in a residential treatment. And you don't have to start everybody in residential treatment to begin with. You can start them in the outpatient. So you really want to have a good evaluation and see what those, and see what is needed at the time, and then be mobile with what is ultimately needed. So, you know, that's the long answer to there's no evidence for 28 days.
So, okay, I understand that, and it's still, after all these years, become like a magic number. I know it's not for the person that's struggling with their addiction, but for these insurance companies, I mean, how do we get that language changed that not everybody fits into that 28-day mold?
It's a very difficult thing to do. One is that programs ultimately have to be supported and be able to, you know, to pay for the treatment services they provide. And then you create a curriculum, and a lot of places have created a curriculum around 28 days. So that's sort of how someone goes through that program and then advance to the next phase. There's something that is very important about people progressing through treatment, whether they start in, you know, in a detox and then advance to a phase 1, a phase 2, a phase 3, outpatient and so forth. There's value in that setting, in that feeling. But how do we convince insurance companies? They're not paying for 28 days routinely as it is. Right. They're always questioning it, and they have what's called there's criteria through ASAM, and they meet levels of care based on that criteria. But there's always a lot of debate in that as well. You could from either side. So this is going to be an ongoing problem. I think that at some point we are going to end up with variable lengths of stay, and that's going to be the model that we end up with. But right now, with curriculums and the way that programs are built, they support that 28 days.
So if a family comes in, this could be for anybody, any of you, if you don't mind opening it up. So if a family comes in, how do they know that their insurance, if they have a son or a daughter under the age of 26, is going to get that 28 days? Or are they going to get challenged after the first 3 days? Is there any way of knowing it, or is that up to the program to help them figure that out? Is that how it works, or?
So I'll start it, and Sam, maybe you want to jump in. But utilization review is part. We have people that do the utilization review for programs, and so they have an idea of what insurance provider, whether it's in network or out of network benefit and so forth. They have an idea of when that might come up for question, but there's no way to know for sure. So sometimes the 28 days is covered and there's never a question. Sometimes at day 2, we're getting a call from the insurer saying, we want to do a review of this. And there's no perfect way. What we're trying to do actually is create partnerships with the insurance companies, and we've really partnered well with Care First so far at Ashley, and they're really have been great to us. They have partnered with us to help us make sure that we can keep people in treatment for the time that's needed, and then they help us continue with getting patients into the next level of care. So that's once we create a partnership between the provider and the payer, we're going to start making some real headway.
Okay. Sam?
Yeah, sure. So just to add to that really quickly, so the health insurance system that we're under now is called managed care, which basically means that the health insurer, whoever you're insured by, is going to manage the care. And in layman's terms, what that means is they would never admit this, but they are going to try to dictate the care, right? They are not going to let the providers like Greg and myself, even though if we say, John is displaying X, Y, and Z symptoms, this is why he needs longer term residential or a step down to IOP or whatever the case is, they are going to go back and they are going to make their own decision. And that decision is going to be made by somebody that has never met your loved one, that has just read something on a piece of paper, that is not even going by what a lot of insurance companies have done now, is they've taken ASAM criteria, which is kind of the gold standard of the criteria for admission. ASAM is the American Society of Addiction Medicine. And then on top of that, they've created their own criteria, which is even stricter on top of ASAM. And so they've made it even harder for us to gain those types of authorizations. In addition to the 28 days, so I read a long time ago in this book that before managed care, the original 28 days came from was that a lot of our servicemen and women were coming back from Vietnam addicted to heroin.
Yes.
And what would happen is we would want them to go get treatment, obviously. We want to support them and go get treatment. But our armed forces had a rule that if they were gone for more than 28 days, they would be considered AWOL. Mm-hmm. And that is how that original 28-day model came in. And the managed care, like Greg said, BCBS came in and said, yeah, that sounds about right to us, 28 days. That's how we're going to look at it.
Families should also know that obviously we have to deal with insurance companies. There is Medicare and there is Medicaid, and a lot of programs, and certainly Heather, in your position at the health department, they will work with families, and people are learning to be creative. Not so much to beat the system, it's very hard to beat the system, but to be creative and say, well, maybe we could take you in for a 2-week period under Medicaid, or maybe there's a scholarship for you for the first 2 weeks until we apply for Medicare or Medicaid for you. And people should also understand that there is a population of individuals over the age of 60 that, excuse me, 65 for Medicare that are on opioids. So you still have to pay attention to Medicare as well as Medicaid. But Joanna, I want to ask you, so when you talk about recovery coaching and you talk about working with a professional, I mean, is there a recommendation period of how long that person should work with you, or how long you will be, you'll always be supportive of them, but let's say on a one-on-one or a group basis, is there like a time period, or you just have to individualize it?
So that's a really good question. I do lead groups at places like Ashley, where the groups that I lead are around helping people to develop goals. So giving them an introduction to that, I do psychoeducation in treatment facilities. So they may see me like a couple of times. But my job is to make sure that when they leave me, that they are that they have something that they can take away, something that they can apply, and something that applies to their future. So as a coach, I'm constantly looking for how much can I give someone as a tool that they can use in the rest of their world, while meeting them exactly where they're at. So that's the answer for inside of treatment facilities. It depends on how long someone will allow us to engage with them. Ideally, a group could last 8 to 12 weeks. We could do a lot of work in that. With any coaching, immersion is always the best thing. And when it comes to individuals, it's generally a project by project. Because I tend to work with people who have successfully navigated the long-term treatment programs. They already have an idea of what they need, and they're looking for support. So we generally contract with those people for 6 months, where we help them to create a plan. We address 10 different areas where we help them to build on the plan in a holistic way, so that if, like, let's say someone is working to alleviate stress and anxiety, we help them to create a relationship plan, so a social plan that could tie in with a physical, an exercise plan, like going to CrossFit or going to the gym. As well as like how nutrition plays into that and how their occupation plays into that. So it could be that we contract with our clients either on a 6-month to create a plan, or on a much longer term basis to reach a specific goal.
So, when people come into programs, there's quote unquote an assessment. And so I'm just asking, are there assessments when they're leaving the program? So when they're, quote unquote, leaving the program and going into another level of recovery, whether it's supportive housing, a sober home, is there some type of evaluation that you do with that person and their family, or to know they're ready to move on? What about if you think they're ready to move on and yet they're afraid to move on because they've been in a safe, protected environment, whether it be 28 days, whether it be 2 months? I would just ask each one of you, we'll start with you, Heather. How do you evaluate whether the person is ready to move on or move out, or however you want to call it, move to their next step of their recovery? There's the one.
Thank you. So my position is not clinical. So I don't technically do an evaluation or an assessment when they enter peer support. What I do is a questionnaire with them to see what their short-term goals are, long-term goals are. I do a treatment plan, a recovery plan. In my position, it's really person-centered. It's really what they want. But I will tell you that at the 6-month mark and then at the 1-year mark, we do another questionnaire to see if their goals have been met, where they are in their recovery, if they've been able to abstain from drugs and other drugs like alcohol. I was going to say something and I totally forgot. Yeah, I'll just move on.
So,
Go back.
Real quick, yeah. So as a peer recovery specialist, my role is to help an individual connect to other recovery resources in the community. I'm not the end-all be-all, because remember, I'm 8 to 4:30. I don't pick up the phone after 4:30, unfortunately. But addiction doesn't end at 4:30.
No.
Recovery doesn't end at 4:30.
Right.
So my role is to help them build their network, to help them build their recovery capital, so that they don't need to call me at 4:30. They have somebody else, whether that be a sponsor in a 12-step fellowship, whether that be a spiritual guide, whether that be maybe a therapist or a counselor who has later hours. Maybe it's just a friend who supports them in their recovery, whatever that looks like to them. My role is that I'm not going to stick around forever. I have an individual that I've worked with for about 2 years. He's definitely maintained his recovery very well, but he still likes to have that added support.
Right.
So I see him once a month. You know what I mean? When they first start out with peer recovery specialists, it's usually once a week that I meet with them, if not more. So the goal is not to have a peer forever. It's to move on to to invest in your recovery.
Exactly.
Thank you.
sure. So in terms of evaluations, if Greg called me one day, and we do a lot of work with Ashley, so if Greg called me and said, hey, I have a guy, his name's John, and this is what he's completed at Ashley, he's getting ready to discharge, I think he's appropriate for your intensive outpatient program, and he's going to live in a sober house supported living. I'm obviously going to trust Greg fully that what he's recommending is what that patient needs. He just worked with him for the past 30 or 60 days. He knows him really well. He knows the family, et cetera, et cetera. But while they're in our program, we are consistently reevaluating what their need. And traditionally, the treatment industry has kind of looked at it very, very black and white, which is, in hindsight, has been a mistake on our part. And that a lot of treatment programs would admit patients, and when they would show signs of symptoms of the disease, they would either, one, hand them down a consequence, or two, probably kick them out of the program. And that never really made sense to me. We are admitting people, for a chronic, progressive, and sometimes fatal illness. And then when they exhibit signs of that illness in the treatment program, kicking them out for the exact reason they admitted doesn't really make a lot of sense, right? So for instance, my staff has a huge tolerance for patients acting out behaviorally because of this reason. And I've said to them and ingrained in them, if a patient comes to you and curses you out, our job as the professionals is to be professional. It's not just to kick them out on a whim just because they're agitated. You took their drugs away from them, they're going to be agitated. We are in a very raw state right now with these people, and so we need to have some tolerance for that. And so we are consistently, when we reevaluate, we're looking much more at quality of life, right? We're looking at, just like Greg said before, okay, well, they may have had a little slip up or a step back, but the relationship with the family is improving greatly. They're applying for jobs and they're active in their job search, or they're trying to get back into school. They're taking a lot, instead of cutting every day like when they got to us, they're now cutting once every 6 weeks. That is how doctors and the medical community look at other illnesses. And we need to start looking at addiction in that sense of how are we managing these symptoms? Are these symptoms as a whole getting better, or are they getting worse? Not just, is somebody able to stay abstinent, or are they using? Because there's a lot more than just that in terms of the symptoms of a substance use disorder.
Yeah, it's like, get out of my hospital, you're too sick.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
I never understood that either, and ultimately, when we see those, we have to expect them, not tolerate them, and we have to treat those symptoms. I mean, a symptom of substance use disorder is lying and bad behavior. So we do have to expect it, and we have to treat it. And so, like you said, instead of kicking somebody out, we say, you need more treatment, stay longer, and so forth. In any case, I completely agree. It's an ongoing assessment. So you have an initial assessment at whatever level of care it is. Now, if we send someone over to Sam, they're going to get another evaluation, no question about it. They will accept the patient. And if they have an evaluation and realize, oh, this isn't the right level of care, they will, figure that out and so forth. But besides the formal evaluation and when levels of care change or places of care change, really it's just an ongoing assessment. And you are assessing not only how they're doing, over time, but what they ultimately need. When somebody relapses or has a reoccurrence of use, which is probably a better way to say it, it is not a complete failure. It is something to be expected in this. And so, yes, we might step up the care, or we might just say this has been, a bump in the road, and that's all right, because that's the nature of this. So we have traditionally looked at abstinence as the indicator for recovery, and we're starting to think, no, actually, that's not what we want to look at. And in fact, decrease in substance use is an improvement, is a good thing, as is the other things we've talked about, which is improvement in life and so forth. We cannot predict who is going to have a reoccurrence. We can't predict it. We've tried, we can't. We do know there are risk factors, and we want to take those into consideration, and we want to treat those ongoing, but we can't predict it. So we should really stop trying to find a prognosis and really just treat what's right in front of us.
Now, Joanna, in your case, if you're working with an individual and very similarly, you feel that that person will come to you with where they are in their lives. We always talk about meeting people where they are, because they're not coming to us to fit into our little 28-day box or whatever. So if you're engaged with a person and you feel that they need much more intensive help, so do you start reaching out to colleagues of yours, or do you talk to the individual, or how do you handle getting them more help that they may need in a different way than just, let's say, a group setting or whatever?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we do lots of assessments. So we do an assessment at the beginning when someone first starts to work with us. We actually attempt to measure where they fall in each one of the 10 categories. We ask them questions like quality of life questions, as well as questions about how they feel about their own recovery and their ability to meet their needs in recovery. So as we're going through that, every 3 months we do that the assessment anew.
Okay.
So these types of things often pop up. In fact, it's not uncommon for us to hit something that is traumatic, or they've never taken an action to increase their social skills, or to go back to school, or to do those types of things. And we find that that's when people get the squirreliest. So we do ask people, this looks like a place where it might be beneficial for us to talk with a counselor or to talk with a spiritual advisor and consider, what do you need? Do you need therapy right now? Do you need medication right now? So that we can continue moving forward in a safe way. Sometimes sometimes I will ask the professionals before I ask them, so that I have a plan in place, and I have at all times 3 recommendations. I said I come from a financial planning background, and doing due diligence literally means I show up at your door and I look at your facility and I see how you do your deal. And if I can't do that, I can't recommend you. And so I make it it is a personal thing for me to do that due diligence. It's a professionalism thing for me. I believe that it's part of the fiduciary responsibility to be able to say, these are 3 different people that can treat what you've got going on, who might possibly be good referrals. I reached out to each one of them. given them a little bit of information about you, but not your name or any identifying information, and give them the opportunity to make their choice, and sit there with them while they're making the calls if that's what they want to do.
That's great.
Mhm.
So it's about 8 o'clock, and I always, like a taskmaster, staying on schedule. So now we're going to open it up, and I want to thank all the panelists. I could go on and on. I mean, I'm going and the great thing about this field is you meet so many wonderful giving people. And I know part of the 12-step program is giving back, but I just love to see people that are working on their recovery and people that are helping others and giving back. And at one point I'd heard somebody say, well, he's extremely reluctant. And I said, well, okay, when I first started teaching special ed, they said, oh, all these learners are reluctant. And I said, that's fine, I'm a reluctant teacher and we'll get along just great. And we ended up getting along great, and that was one of my specialties. I love that field. So I'm gonna go ahead, and if you can direct your questions, I'm gonna see a raise of hands, please, for people that have questions or concerns or any comments that you'd like to make. These are the people to ask, because they all come from a different walk of life in many ways, but they can cover the spectrum of this whole world of many paths to recovery. Okay.
With the opioid epidemic at such a high degree, I feel it's more of a blame game with the patients coming in, and I was wondering what kind of advocacy was going on as you guys were discussing with making it more of an illness-based cancer recovery versus a don't do this, what's wrong?
Okay, I'm just gonna make one comment.
Yeah.
And now, I may be wrong on this, so I've been hearing different things about it. So I was told from somebody that works at the CDC that we're not supposed to use the word opiate epidemic, because that means it's a transferable disease. So we don't use the word opiate crisis. So I don't know if they're trying to downplay this or not, but I think that's a very good question for our panel. So, and we do, NCADD does a lot of legislative work, as most of the people on the panel know that. So, yeah, it's very tough, but most of the legislators that we work with, most recently, even last weekend, a former legislator, his son died of an overdose. And so, before it was many years ago, it was a city disease, city of Baltimore, but now it's everywhere. So we all know somebody. I mean, everybody in this room knows somebody or is related to somebody. And so it is a huge crisis that we need to deal with. But the legislators are really trying to work on it, and they have a much better understanding. So I've been pretty pleased. We have a whole new group of legislators this year that are willing to come out and learn about it and figure out, gosh, what can I do to make a difference? I'll turn it over to the panel then to answer your question.
Yeah, I mean, there's a ton of advocacy that's going on. There's a lot of bills that were introduced in this legislative session that were meant to accomplish a number of things. A couple of years ago in Maryland, we had a number of huge wins. One was the Good Samaritan law, which we got passed, which basically says that if I am with somebody and they overdose and I'm using drugs with them, I can call the police to make sure that life gets saved without me getting in trouble for using drugs with that person. So that was a huge win for us, because a lot of people were not calling and letting people die out of fear that if they called the police that they would get in trouble too. And then the second one was allowing Narcan to be given out without a prescription. And so those were two huge legislative wins that we had in the past 5 years. There were a couple bills introduced this legislative session, one regarding mental health and substance use parity for insurance companies that was trying to create a commission within the Maryland Insurance Administration to enforce the parity laws that were passed with the Affordable Care Act to make sure that insurance companies are treating substance use disorder equally to the way they treat other medical illnesses. And there's, on my ride here, I was riding on, I think that road is 140, and I saw a huge billboard that for the movie Heroin Still Kills.
Right.
And so, I think 10 years ago, nobody would ever lease a billboard that would say that, no matter what. And so, so there's a lot. I'm not sure what Carroll County is, but I know in Baltimore County, we just got the health department to allow us putting up billboards of overdose statistics in 12 different areas in Baltimore County. I know Carroll County, I think, is much more progressive in that sense in Hartford County, but Baltimore County just passed that. There are a lot of organizations. NCADD is one huge advocacy organization. There are a lot of different ones throughout the state that really work tirelessly to get laws passed, to decrease stigma, to get the word out that we need more access to treatment. We need, tighter laws around pharmaceuticals, prescribing, specifically opiates, obviously, and a number of other things as well. So there are huge movements going on. Part of the issue is there are certain movements at state levels, because there are certain state laws that are damaging us stigma-wise. There are also federal ones that are as well. And so there are many different groups that have band together at the state level, at local levels, as well as at the federal level. I'll give you an example. So in Baltimore County, the only place that a treatment center is allowed to open in their zoning code is in the manufacturing district of zoning. Baltimore County has like 12 different commercial zones. Manufacturing is the only zone that you are permitted to open any type of substance use treatment center. That is because of stigma, right? That was passed because of stigma. And that was passed because of NIMBY issues of not in my backyard. And so, that is something that we are working on locally in Baltimore County to get the zoning board to lighten up a bit and to say, hey, look, we can't expand access to treatment if this is the only zoning law here, if this is the law here. And I'm sure you can picture what most manufacturing zones look like. Not really a friendly place for people to go and they walk in and they're like, this is the place I'm gonna heal. It's industrial, it's dirty, it's not great. And so there are issues on every level, on very localized, on the state level, and on the federal level too. But there are a lot of people that are mobilizing to get that stuff done.
And this year we had another, there were two others, which we've been trying to talk about for years, but it's treatment behind the walls, as we call it, talking about medication-assisted therapy in the detention centers and hopefully in the future years behind the state prisons as well, because the likelihood of people coming out of prison and relapsing or going right back to the substance abuse is very, very high. So we were able to get that passed for, I believe it is 4 counties as a pilot program. And then we also have what they call, and some of you may remember this, but with tobacco, it's passed the opioid restitution law, which basically states that when you successfully sue the pharmaceutical companies and the monies are awarded, when they finally get awarded from the pharmaceutical companies, then there's going to be an opioid restitution fund that we can utilize for treatment. So there were some several bills this year, as Sam had said.
And the restitution money, the forfeiture money.
And then we also, thank you, Tony Torch's bill, the forfeiture money. So when there's a drug bust, we have a lot of research to do on this. It's never clear where that money's going. So other than, I don't want to say where I believe it's going because that's really judgmental. So we're trying to get to the bottom of that. There's still more research we have to do on that seizure money and forfeiture money, but there are avenues for money for treatment, and we're just trying to get to the bottom of it. The federal government has awarded the state of Maryland, different lump sums under different grants, and we're trying to get an accountability of those funds. So we are moving in the right direction. There's no question about it. So I don't know, does that answer your question, sir?
I have a couple more things real quick to say. So as far as the restitution money and the money that is being confiscated, the billboard that you see that says heroin still kills is paid for by that money, by the drug dealers' money that's been confiscated. Heroin Still Kills, the whole film was funded by that money. And if you have any questions about that, you can definitely see Tim Weber afterwards. He has more information on that. But as far as the advocacy groups and policy, additional to what Sam said, there's also smaller advocacy groups that work tirelessly to get our voice out there. And a lot of those individuals that run those advocacy groups are parents who have lost their loved ones, lost their children. And if you come on April 25th, you'll definitely hear from one of them. Her name is Tammy Lofink. She has started an organization called Rising Above Addiction. I know that she does some advocacy, but Beth Schmidt here in the back, if you raise your hand, she has started MHAA. Please help me. It's Maryland Heroin Awareness Advocacy Group. So she is always promoting going down to Annapolis on Facebook. She's promoting, she messaged me the other day saying that there's a bus going down, and if I wanted to get on the bus. It's those people that work tirelessly to get our voice heard. And additional, if you have a voice and you've been touched anyway by addiction, please go out and get your voice heard, because the people that sit back and complain and don't do anything about it, they're the ones that aren't using their voices, and the only way that we can do it is by getting out there.
Heather's absolutely right. I mean, we have what we call an advocacy training program for people, just like anybody in this room, to become an advocate. So if you have an opinion, as Heather says, you're an advocate. And we've done many of the advocacy training programs. We had a funny story when we first started it. It's called a Recovery Leadership Program maybe 10 years ago. And we gave everybody, like we say, their elevator speech. So if you have 3 minutes, now they're cutting us down to a minute and a half in Annapolis. They used to give us 3 minutes, now they give us a minute and a half. How do you tell your story? So you have to really get that message out there. And the attention span of legislators is limited also. So, the first time I went, they were all on their Blackberries. It was before iPhones even. And, and I said, my God, they're not even looking up. What's going on here? I've got 3 minutes, nobody's watching. But there was a young woman there who had Down syndrome, and all of a sudden she spoke up and she said, what am I going to do? I'm 21 and I'm graduating, and where am I going to go to school? And every one of them put down their Blackberry and thought that was interesting. So I came back and said, well, what happened to our folks? Where are people that are in recovery? Or where are people that are struggling? Where are family members? Why can't they be here? And so that's important, because when they can see how people have progressed, I hate to say it's a return on their investment, because they're putting the dollar signs through these bills and through the budget, and it is an investment. And when you talk about advocacy, we have someone else in this room other than Tim Weber, Barbara Allen, who has been a champion advocate, and she's going to be the moderator for the family group on the 25th, right? Yes. Is that correct, Barbara? Right. 25th. So everybody's an advocate. Everybody in this room is an advocate. Anybody, they can call any one of us, if you need any lessons, which I don't think you do. I'm sure all of you know what to say and how to say it. And, the more meaningful it is and more personal it is for you, they understand, because they all have a family member that, has been affected in some way. Great.
Yeah, so just taking a little bit more of the 30,000-foot view, we're making tremendous progress. I mean, we can go on and on about this. It's great. We have advocates. It's wonderful. We have a spotlight right now on the crisis, or epidemic, whatever you want to call it. But,
right.
And that's because lots of people are dying. And the other spotlight is on the bad behaviors associated with addiction, right? And when you have a spotlight on those bad behaviors with addiction and death, there's going to be stigma. And bad behavior associated with addiction should be stigmatized. But you stigmatize the behavior and not the person. When I think we're seeing a huge change is when we start seeing those lots of people getting better, and those people themselves are very vocal, and they're saying, this I was this way, and this is the way I am now, and I survived it. That's where because that's not just the advocacy, that's the real living proof of resiliency, or resilience. And so when we see those resilience, I think the stigma will start to be decreased. But we have a long way to go.
Yes.
And it's not going to happen, no matter how much we advocate, it's not going to happen today. It's going to happen over a long period of time. But I think we can get there.
Absolutely. Is there another question? Yes.
I work in Carroll County with the Health Department. I review every fatal overdose and many of the non-fatal overdoses. And what I'm running into are a lot of children that are losing their parents. Many of them have found their parents. And when you're talking about trauma, a few days ago we had a situation where the father overdosed in the wee hours of the morning, and then the mother, thankfully not fatally overdosed later in the day, and both times children found them. My fear is that in 10 years or 15 years, I will be reading the children's story. How can we treat or deal or lessen the trauma that what unfortunately we've named them opium orphans? Because last year we had 75 in this little tiny county. So either of you gentlemen, can you make a suggestion? Give me some place to start.
Well, we can't lessen that trauma because that trauma is there. So unless the event doesn't occur, we can't lessen it. So it ends up as how are we going to deal with it? And addressing and treating those kids early and aggressively is going to be the key to it. Now, how we do that exactly, I'm not sure. What resources they need, I'm not positive. But it is rallying around them and figuring that out. You know, and it's going to take time to develop the right programs and get the resources and so forth to do it. But I agree 100%, they can't be ignored. And we better be paying attention to it now. It's much like the kids with the neonatal abstinence syndrome. It's a real problem, and we're going to see that down the line. You know, so we better start addressing it. And we are addressing it right now in a variety of ways. We certainly have to look at that group as well.
Yeah, I don't really have much to add to that. I mean, you know, when you first asked that question, I was still in shock by the numbers that you just read off. But you know, when Greg was talking, you know, I was relating it back to a little bit about. You know, I told you guys my mom had cancer. She subsequently passed away from that cancer. And I was thinking about the treatment and the help that I got after that. And just like Greg said, it should be similar, right? We should be, whoever's in their family system, in their support system, whatever resources there are available, they should be rallying around them as much as possible and getting them the intense treatment that they need or help that they need, like right now. You know, it's such a tragic, tough situation. I really,
And it's not
I
just
don't know.
treatment, it's wraparound services.
Yeah, wraparound
I mean,
services, right. You know, making sure that they're with their peers and they're with their age group and they're back in school at some point and doing all those things that other kids their age are doing and making sure they have additional support around them. I don't really know if I can think of anything else right now. But that's absolutely tragic.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that there are programs, I know in Howard County, which is where I live, the school system has brought in, I can't remember if it's 5 or 6 social workers, so that when there is this kind of trauma in the household, then the social workers will go work with the families, with the children, to help in that circumstance. And it may not be just that they died from an overdose. It could be that there was a divorce or there was a death in the family or they lost a job or whatever. But they started intervening with the idea that the earlier that they, so one of the terms that gets used is adverse childhood experience, or ACEs. The earlier they intervene, the better the chances are for the children as well as the rest of the family. So that's just one idea I know that's been, it's not unusual, it's just one that's been implemented. The other thing I wanted to say is a lot of times it's grandparents end up raising these kids.
Yes.
There are tremendous support systems for grandparents raising their children, raising their grandchildren because their family members have lost their lives, and particularly to overdose. So many of them are Facebook support systems, but they are for grandparents specifically as an example. So there's just two things that I would throw out for information.
Are there any other questions? Yes.
I have a question. One of the values that is core to us here at the Elks is charity. So in addition to monetary support of your programs, how can we get involved and support in the work that you all are doing?
So one of the ways that you can get involved in support is through the ROSCs. So each county has a ROSC. A ROSC is a recovery-oriented system of care. And they are places where citizens, faith leaders, non-faith leaders, treatment providers, schools, government workers, everybody can get involved and contribute what they can contribute when they can contribute. The state of Maryland has this incredible ROSC program, and it's actually a mandate that all of the counties have a ROSC. So in Baltimore County, the ROSCs they fall under the Baltimore County ROSC. In Howard County, it's the Howard County ROSC. In Carroll County, it is the Carroll County Opioid Prevention Coalition, as well as Wesley Freedom, the Family Resource Center, makes use of a lot of community members to provide support for children, grandparents seeking to do things. So finding the ROSC in your area is a huge thing, and just being willing to show up and contribute in whatever way that you can. We're definitely looking for people.
There are also a ton of advocacy groups, like I think somebody mentioned, that were started by parents that lost their children, and they are the heartbeat that keeps the advocacy movement going. The majority, if not all of them, are nonprofits. So Barbara Allen has a foundation, and NCADD is a nonprofit foundation, and the Daniel T. Torch Foundation. So there are lots of family foundations throughout the state that are really, heavy into the advocacy movement and doing a wonderful job at it, and that would be my go-to for it, for sure.
Tim, did you have a question? Tim? No? Yeah.
No, I will say something about what she was talking about with the opioid overdoses, is that I know in Carroll County, the state's attorney's office recently started Handle with Care. I think it's been implemented.
Yes, last year.
Yeah. Yeah, so that is what whenever there's a police-involved incident at home and there's a child involved, they send something to the school. So really, it started with domestic violence, but with the opioid crisis or epidemic, they started to see that there were 75 fatals, but there was numerous ones where they showed up and the kid was the one that actually had to call 911 and have their parents safe. So that alone is traumatic. So they'll go to the school, they won't say what the incident was, they'll keep an eye on that child. They're even taking it a step further. I don't work there anymore, but I think that there was the start of the talks of even having a camp. For a lot of kids that have dealt with this kind of trauma and have addicted parents and family members, that these kids will go to a camp together and spend a weekend to be able to talk about it, because they don't get to talk about it. It's something that's, like Sam was saying, with cancer you can talk about your parents, but you're not going to go say, hey, my mom overdosed yesterday. So there is a lot. Carroll County really does a lot of stuff to kind of deal with that.
Very progressive.
And the only problem we have with Handle with Care, because it is, the police have to show up. So if there's no police involvement, it doesn't get activated. So, we're trying to backstop the police at the health department, because as I said, I get the reports. So unfortunately, it could be 3, 4, 5 days before I get a report, and then I contact the head of school counseling. But we're trying to through the program, because it's under a grant, to start programs that would help not only the children, but young adults. Because the very young, it seems the elementary school age has a great deal of support. Middle school, not as much, and high school even less. High school and college age kids even less. And what we're looking to start is even a siblings group, because we found that in reviewing our cases, that a lot of siblings, children and siblings are the ones that tend to find the parent or the sibling. And so that's kind of what I was asking is, how can we address this trauma? Because, as I said, I review every single fatal overdose. I see in their history where they have, to a person, experienced some life trauma that has taken us down this path. And truly is my fear, because I get to know these people so well through their stories, through talking to their families, that in 10, 15 years, I'll be seeing the next generation.
So I partnered with my position. I specialize in the overdoses. I actually work very closely with Luann. And as you know, I started working with CPS. So when an individual overdoses, not fatally, when they make it, or if there's substance exposure in the home, I go out with CPS, which is Child Protective Services, and I help the individual who is using. But I will tell you that the ladies and the women at CPS are great with the children. They get them enrolled in any kind of trauma therapy, any kind of grief therapy if they lost a parent or a sibling. They are very well informed of all the services that Carroll County has to offer for the children. Also, I just read on Facebook today the eSmart. That one of the criteria for them to be in the eSmart program, which don't ask me what it is, it's what it stands for, but it's out of the health department. And it's for children, but one of the criteria is that if they are neonatal exposure, or if they have experienced their parents using or witnessed an overdose. So maybe talk to them. But
It's from 5 to 7, 5 to 8. 3 to 8, I'm sorry, 3 to 8. It's young children. That's what I said, there's a great deal of support for young children. We just need to find what to
We do have a program next Wednesday, being put on by our hospice
Yes, sir.
for the teens, but I mean, that's just one day. But
It's
it's
not
a
for
start.
them, it's for the family, for the parents and guardians.
Okay.
Luann, maybe we should start something.
Yeah, I was gonna say, if anybody can do it, Carroll County can do it. Absolutely. Any other questions? Yes.
Hi, my name's Lauren Lilly, and I work for Mountain Manor, and I also work for Foundations. And I'm also in long-term recovery, and where I got my start was in incarceration, and that was actually the reason I came to Carroll County. And Carroll County seems to have a lot of really great resources for people who are in recovery. Heather was actually my peer support. Now I'm going through my own peer support classes as well, so it's really cool. But one of the things that I was just curious about, and one of the things I definitely want to be an advocate for is people who are incarcerated who are also looking for treatment and for recovery as well. We kind of talked about you guys kind of talked about the behaviors of what people do, and it's not uncommon for someone who has substance abuse disorder to commit crimes. You know what I mean? And so I'm just curious, where an individual like me would be able to start to be able to advocate for people who are facing long-term, time because of the mistakes that they made in their lives that ultimately had to do with their addiction.
Well, that's the thing that they're starting to do, but Carroll County has learned, I know in the detention center that they have certain programs, but that's why we've been fighting so hard. There's only really 2 states that are doing basically what I call successful treatment behind the walls. That's Rhode Island, and now it's going to be Maryland. So we worked very hard. I
I met with the Deputy Secretary of Corrections for the state prisons because we were having a hard time getting lecturers from AA to come in because they wanted them to fill out a 20-page application. I said, they're coming in one time. This is not a long term. And we had to really jump through hoops to get that, even to get NA and AA. So we're trying to take it beyond that. I think there's not a clear understanding of individuals that come into the system that have a history of substance abuse. And unfortunately, that's got to change. So I'm really pretty encouraged that, you know, slowly but surely it will change. The attitude has to change. People can't just be written off because they're behind the walls. I mean, that's the attitude. We had correctional officers that were threatening some of our lecturers and knowing where they lived, and it was very scary for them. And their attitude was, well, they're gonna be here for 12 years. Yeah, they may be here for 12 years, but why not give them the help that they need? Not wait till they come out and give them the name of a treatment program and say, you know, $20 and good luck. So, you know, the conversation has got to change, you're absolutely right. But I think the detention centers are doing a pretty good job with that. And then we have this medication-assisted treatment behind the walls that I think is breaking down some barriers. Rhode Island has had some very successful rates of people coming out and not relapsing. So it's a huge change of conversation, but I'm really proud of the people of Maryland, the legislators in the state for passing this. So there's very few states that have it. So you're absolutely right. There's got to be a real change in the attitude and the implementation. That doesn't always answer your questions for right now, but we're getting there. Hopefully it's a beginning, let's put it that way. Barbara.
Yeah, I'd also say that Virginia has treatment behind the walls in some of their jails. And they're really, I've been invited to the program, so they have people who are in treatment in one section of the prison and those that are not in another section. And the staff is really amazing. So there are models out there for doing this, and they have means for people that aren't in the treatment side who come forward and say, you know, I think it's time for me to address this. So I like that there are models out there and that things are working. And I know our detention center has been doing treatment behind the walls for a couple of years, and it's successful. So it's not like it's a foreign concept, but again, it's the advocacy, it's the, you know, come with us.
Right. You're absolutely right. The detention centers and the ones in Virginia that I'm familiar with, we still have issues with the state prisons. And we still have issues with Lorton out in Virginia. And a lot of that, we're going to be doing a presentation to the wardens. I mean, these wardens seem to be very scared about this whole thing because it's a change in attitude. Oh my gosh, we have to help people? You know, jail's a money-making business. What do you mean we got to help people? So, I mean, it's really, we have to get down real basics. As Barbara said, there are models out there are programs that work. But again, it's breaking down the barriers. And there's a real fear factor from correctional officers to wardens. I mean, and we had to get them to change the application to be a lecturer from 20 pages to 2 pages and to process it within 30 days. So it's amazing. That's a system that is so hard to break down and work through. But so many of our individuals, you know, they do become incarcerated. And so we really need to help them. We really
and after the walls is really important too.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Real legislation can make a difference.
Yeah. Yes.
I'm Larry Dickerson. I also work with Ashley Addiction Treatment, but I wanted to add something just to what you were saying and just to be brief. So sometimes you might want to, and I live in Delaware, so I commuted to Ashley, but I'm very politically active in Delaware, and we often connect with political organizations that might be the bridge to doing more services to helping incarcerated individuals. It's one of the things you might want to think about as far as there's so many people that really want to do the same things you're doing. There just might not be the connection or the link. So, you know, the corrections officers may be just as frustrated with it, and they want to do something. They're in the trenches right there working with the inmates. you might go to the outside and have a drive and one motivates you to do it, but you don't know how to do it. But there are other organizations, political groups, maybe something very local, who also are thinking like you're thinking. You might want to link up with them and see what they're doing. You may be the one who says, okay, can we start to go into the prison system and start to work with these individuals? So there are tons of groups out there which might help you make that, build that bridge to working more with substance disorders and working with people, to get into the path of recovery. But it's just maybe sometimes you might be the one starting, but it's out there. And I do a lot through political action, through other means. So but people all want the same thing. I think you'll find the army out there is really, really vast, and a lot of people want to help out.
Any other questions concerning Joanne?
Actually, I was thinking too, talking to Brendan Welsh at Behavioral Health Administration, Adley Weber, those guys, they can definitely help with explaining the process that Baltimore County took to get peers into the detention center.
Exactly.
Because there are peers embedded into the detention center. And they would probably be an excellent way for you to understand how they did it and how it might be possible here in Carroll County.
No, I think they do. Heather, you can speak
So
to
we
that.
have here in Carroll County, and I think you may have met them, we have reentry through the health department, where we have case managers and peers in the jail that meet
Yes.
with you before you exit. And then, I mean, the one peer that I knew was picking people up as they were leaving jail.
Exactly.
Like they were the first at that door, picking you up off those steps. And then helping guide you with the next steps. And a lot of that is just, and that's what a peer does, is, as you know, is that we go and help you get a bank account. The little things that matter, right? But I will tell you that additional to Brendan and Adelaide, Brandy. That is Brandy, is Gyara's passion, is getting
Criminal
the
justice.
peers in the jails. Yes, I know. So keep working with her, keep talking to her. I love what this gentleman from Delaware said, and I'm big on that, using your voice. And just keep pushing. Keep asking the right questions at the right places, to the right people, and you'll get there.
Well, I'd like to thank the panel. You can all give yourself a big hand. Questions, and we'll try and help you in any way that we can. Thank you.